My name is Aaron Brown, and I used to be a CIA covert operations officer, an Army Ranger sergeant, and a deputy sheriff. And I'm currently an entrepreneur, a technologist, and a rabble-rouser. And this is the Undersimplified Podcast. In episode 5, we speak with General Jasper Jeffers. General Jeffers, or Jasper as he prefers, has had a long career in the Army, most of which he spent in special operations and deployed to combat zones. Just prior to picking up his first general's star, he served as the senior tactical commander for special operations in Syria. But you prefer to go by Jasper. You encourage it, and you do so deliberately as a leadership strategy, and it seems to be working.
Well, for a long time, as a young person in the military or a younger officer in the military, it didn't really matter. Everybody was senior to you, so they were calling you by your first name. There's a good chunk of my career where people didn't know what my last name was. I've been in places where they came in and they're like, hey, I'd like to talk to Jeffers. And they're like, well, who is that? I have enjoyed trying to be more informal with my relationships with everybody, but certainly with the people that I lead and with the people that I'm peers with.
You're a one-star general at this point in the Army. You spent most of your career in the special operations community, and you've held leadership positions across many of those. And we're still missing, in my opinion, the most interesting parts of your career, and I know why, but you have some very specific units on your LinkedIn page, and then you have some very unspecific titles, such as leader, from 2018 to 2021. So I just wondered if you wanted a chance to comment on that at all, or maybe it'd be better if I did some word association and you just tell me what you think. I'll say, what does it mean to you when I say behind the fence?
Well, I was going to go back to the gaps in the LinkedIn profile. I'd be hard pressed to find a title that I'm more proud of than leader. So that's the way I kind of thought about that. I was like, I'm most proud of that title. I talked about identity earlier, but I'm super proud of that within the Army, just like leader. And I think for the folks that know the kind of things that we've done before, it's enough to know that they know. If you've needed to use that to either gain the respect or understanding from someone that you're either trying to lead or interact with, you're probably using a tool or an idea that's actually, or you're in a relationship leader-led context-wise, that's actually not great if you actually have to go there.
How do leaders at the top make decisions when they didn't grow up in a space where they experienced any of these things that they're making decisions about? A 4-star general who spent their entire time in the infantry in the 70s and 80s and got to the 90s, not much really had changed. Their intuitions about how a maneuver element would go were probably pretty correct.
Yeah.
But the second that a drone swarm becomes a reality, that's not just a small tactical change on the battlefield. That means maneuvering around a battlefield has probably got to change very dramatically at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Part of what I think you're getting at there, too, is even me. Like, I am not equipped to make really hard technical decisions. I mean, I'm a liberal arts major from Virginia Tech, right? That's an engineering school where you didn't get an engineering degree. Like, you have to kind of like figure like where I was on the math grades on that. I was lucky to get out of there with any degree, but none of us are. And it's true across the military. Like the way I got at it, and at least you can recognize that that's an issue, is I had a smart person, right? We brought in someone to be the command technology officer. And again, going back to identity and titles, the important part of it was that we gave that person decision-making ability. He had the same decision-making ability for programs, for money, for time, which are really, and people, manpower, which are, if you think about like the things that when the Department of Defense makes decisions at any level, you're really talking about time, people, money, and how you spend those fungible resources, not necessarily in that order, depending on what level you're at. And that person, like brilliant young man, you may have to cut his name out later. If you're out there listening, like I'll give you a shout out. He had the ability based on his background, both his little bit of personal hacking time and time in industry, and just generally living in this space to be able to look at a problem for us and say, no, you can't, you don't go buy that. Don't go buy that. You're going to spend a bunch of money on stuff that you can't go. And And he had the authority to do it through me, but we work closely together on it. I think he would say this, like what I encouraged him to do up front was, I got it, get the people right first. You may have to do structural adjustments, but think of them more structurally in terms of like how our talent is arrayed and what we're going to do with that talent before you start making the choices on what we're going to then either purchase or adjust about our strategy for technology in the organization. And he took that like in the super humble way he did and did it. And I think it worked. Now you're talking about a small organization. If you scale that up, it's tough. But I think the idea that I'm not equipped to make the decisions, I got to figure a way to offset that, and just relying on internal subject matter experts, that's a way, it's probably not the optimal way. If you really wanted to change the culture and bureaucracy here, you would address the things that have nothing to do with warfighting. Like where we should be using the disruptive tech is in how to make the way we live daily simpler. And that's the real disruption, is letting the equivalent of letting engineers be engineers in any space where you need somebody to work on those kind of problems. Free up time for people to be creative so that they don't have to do ridiculous minutia as part of their day-to-day life, and you will massively change organizations. If you gave me an unlimited budget and said, take your technology and apply it against the hardest problems that you have right now, I would spend almost all of it getting rid of the day-to-day stuff to allow the smart people that work for me just to think about other problems, not about how to do the 3-ring binder or the TPS report.
As you look back on all that you've done over the years, and you talk about resiliency and how much you've done in training, you've also obviously been on some pretty amazing missions and operations, and we're not going to get into some of the coolest ones here, unfortunately, unless you want to. Feel free to drop some new news here. I won't turn you down, but I understand we can't get into that. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, everybody gets into the courage stories and how did you get your silver star or whatever. I do enjoy those stories, but the ones that I often think about and that resonate with me are the stories about fear. And it really is about overcoming fear in these hazardous environments and combat, which I never experienced. This is an interesting point about my life. I've been in dangerous situations. I've been around some dangerous situations, and I've been in time adjacent to dangerous situations. So I've had a lot of time to think about fear and what would I be like in those fearful situations. I hope, in my heart of hearts, I hope I would have done what so many of my colleagues did that did go there, but I can't know. A great example, as I said, I left Rangers prior to September 11th, but just prior, November of 2000. 1st Ranger Battalion, 1st Platoon, ended up going into Afghanistan immediately after September 11th, or fairly immediately. My platoon ended up being in one of the first combat engagements in that entire war in Tucker Gar. After Navy SEAL Neil Roberts fell out of a helicopter in an engagement that they were doing up in the mountains, and 1st Ranger Battalion ended up, 1st Platoon ended up going in as the QRF. And 2 of my good friends from Ranger Regiment at that time were killed before they even got off the helicopter. And this is just, months after 9/11. And I had a lot of time to think about that and what the fear must have been like, and that they overcame, obviously, to get the mission done even after that. And I wonder if you've ever had a situation where if people looked at you from the outside, they saw courage or leadership under fire.
Yeah, for sure. I got a long list of times that I was exceedingly terrified in the business. You do learn to grow out of it, though, a little bit. The individual kind of physical fear aspects of it, you kind of learn to understand when it's bad, and enough experience, I think, teaches you how to kind of manage that. It doesn't ever go away, but you learn how to manage yourself in those situations where you can focus on the team and you can focus on the folks immediately around you. Where I likely was putting on more of a strong face than what I felt in reality, most of those were in the more senior leadership roles that I had, where you are really responsible for all of those lives at once. And the right thing to do is to be steady and calm and try to present that to those folks you're leading. The most scared that I have ever been. I mean, the example I would use, were you thinking about going somewhere? Were you guys thinking about...
No, I didn't know where you were going to go there. I was like, I'm really curious where he's going to go here. I also don't want you to put an example out there that you might have to pull back. But I know you've got some particularly, and you can also, if you want to talk about one and sort of keep it vague what it is. But yeah, I saw you going somewhere there. That's like, I don't know what he's about to say next.
Well, there's probably 2 or 3 operations where I had more than maybe even the lives of the folks that I was commanding that were maybe not in my hands necessarily, but really dependent on the decisions that I made. And you think about the types of operations those might be, whether, in a big part of my career has been about thinking about hostage rescue, and it's hard to come up with a mission or an operation that is more morally sound than trying to go somewhere and save a life in that kind of situation. And so there's a great degree of moral certitude. You feel very justified when you go on those. At the same time, as a leader, you take that on. If you own the whole thing and you get it wrong, the cost isn't just the people that signed up to go and do these kind of things, which, you're around the best people on planet Earth to go do it. But the cost could be the lives of the people you're trying to save. And it doesn't matter how well-intentioned you are. At the end of the day, it's still somebody's daughter or son. And I had the opportunity to do at least one of those, and it didn't work out. I think about how I always wonder, the fear that maybe I didn't show necessarily outside is like, I always go back. It's like, did it change how I made decisions? The worry that I had about all the people that I had to manage, both the people that I commanded and then the potential lives that may have been there, is like, did I do it right? And I think those kind of internal fears are different than physical fears, but in my experience, maybe everybody's, I don't know, but certainly in my experience, like, I feel that more acutely than any time that I may have been individually. And there's certain individual courage that I was around people every day that, uncommon valor was just a part of their makeup. And I would never want to be put in the same category as them, because the kind of things that they would do, the selflessness that they would display is just, it's truly something that people will write books about someday. But the fear that I felt internally was more tied up in, was I going to make the right call when the time came? Because that's really what, going back to the coach metaphor, like, you got to make the call, go for it on 4th down or not. And sometimes they're going to stuff you, and then you got to figure out what to do next.
And you weren't working for a team that was used to getting stuffed at that time. The football metaphor doesn't quite hold up to this one we're talking about, because the football team that you played for was like 101 or something, or 1,001.
Yeah.
On the record.
We were used to winning.
Yeah.
Used to winning.
Win most of the time. I wish we had this on video, because even your face as you were thinking through that was, I could almost be right there with you. If you weren't wearing a Mandalorian t-shirt, it might have been,
probably for the technology piece of it, like you get a little Star Wars on my t-shirt.
No, I really appreciate you taking the time. I love the optimism that you're bringing to this and what you're doing as a leader in the military, and I've learned a lot from you, and will continue to use some of the lessons that you've imparted to some of your junior folks, and then they've shared them with me, which has been really pretty cool.
I appreciate it, Aaron, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. I am optimistic and hopeful, and want all of us to finally end up in that world that I envision in my head. And like I said, I'm hopeful, not just for me, for my kids, for all of us, that we'll get there.